in the next few minutes, that's cool. But kia ora koutou, everyone. We'll start with a karakia to get things going. Tu taua mai I runga, tu taua mai I raro, tu taua mai I waho, tu taua mai I roto, ki tau Aotea Māori tū, te maro ora ki te katoa, haumei hui taikie. So, morning everyone, ko Joe Ruskaho, who's a co-convener on the SLIS committee, and I also work at the New Zealand Police Library. So on behalf of the SLIS committee, I'd love to welcome you all to the first virtual session for the year, and what we actually think is quite a pertinent session for all of us at the moment in the sort of environment that we find ourselves operating out of. You know, we've still got COVID. The world just seems pretty uncertain and a bit, you know, wonky at the moment. Everyone came back from the Christmas break and sort of felt a bit flat and a bit sad. I don't know, everyone seemed a bit down, you know, and so how do you maintain your business and keep your staff and yourselves buoyant and going when there's just all this, you know, all this going on around us. So to kickstart this conversation, we're really pleased to have Laurinda Thomas from Wellington City Libraries to come and just give a little presentation about, you know, how it is in her space. And of course, she's got leaky pipes to worry about down there in Wellington and various other things. So just to, you know, to start the conversation, and then after that, we'll have a bit of a Q&A around just any questions you've got, any concerns people have, or anything that you want to share. It's just to see what, you know, what themes are out there. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Laurinda. Take it away.
Kia ora, thank you, Joe. No ingarangi o ku tūpuna, I whana mai au e papaioia ki te whanganui atara tōku kāinga e nāi, ko Laurinda Thomas tuku ingoa. I am Laurinda Thomas. I'm the manager of Wellington City Libraries, and I thought I might just start off just by setting a little bit of the scene, because I know that although this is officially a SLIS kind of presentation, we have people from a number of different sectors present. I did used to work in special libraries. I've also worked in academic and now in public libraries as well. So I'll try to draw in some examples from lots of different sectors and areas just to sort of help us along. So hopefully you can all see my presentation. I'm hoping I'll get a thumb up. Fantastic. So I think sometimes when we think about keeping calm and carrying on, which is kind of what we're called on to do at the moment and in the current environment that we find ourselves in, we often kind of end up having two reactions. One is kind of the internal reaction, which is kind of more like this. I have been previously told by a manager that I needed to calm down, to which I said, nobody has ever calmed down in the history of being told to calm down. Like, that just doesn't happen. And so often we kind of have this internal reaction to the things that are going on, but this is kind of how we have to present ourselves to the world. Everything is very calm. And so I wanted to kind of put that out there first of all, because I think one of the things that happens when things are quite stressful is often we feel as though we have to put on a little bit of a front about how everything currently is. And so I thought I would just kind of start with this to kind of set the scene, I guess, about how we can feel quite conflicted sometimes about the many things that are going on within our spaces. So what is going on? Firstly, I think one point I kind of wanted to make really is that everyone is more anxious, stressed, and tired. I think sometimes we're like, am I just imagining it because I feel tired? And I think the short answer is no. Firstly, you're not imagining it, and our customers are more tired. They're more anxious. They're more stressed, and following kind of a spate, I guess, of issues and things that we had here at Wellington City Libraries, I started to kind of dig into this topic a little bit, in particular around what's called post-pandemic stress disorder, which is a real thing. And they do often talk about this kind of lasting for anything kind of up to 5 years after a pandemic. And so people are genuinely kind of stressed. And COVID also has an impact on us as well, not just from the customers and other people that were around, but actually we get COVID too. I had COVID a month ago, and it's completely kind of tipped upside down everything that I was planning to do and all of my schedules. So, you know, it becomes quite stressful. And then layered on top of that, we've got what we often get called in council as the 3 I's, which have kind of hit people. So we've had the last couple of years of increasing inflation, and then we've had increasing interest rates, and then also increasing insurance. And these things have pressures both on our organisations and on ourselves as well as individuals. And so all of that is kind of driving a real sense of uncertainty and stress and worry. And for example, I know that particularly for those of you who are kind of in the government sector, all of the change of government brings its own kind of stresses as well, particularly when you're seeing lots of things in the media and about here's the savings target, and that, yourself or your colleagues might be looking at job losses potentially. So our resilience scores are quite low overall, after having gone through that pandemic, and then all of the things that have kind of flown out of that afterwards. I guess the thing that's kind of interesting to consider is we often kind of talk about the new normal, and then I have to kind of step back and say, well, what does normal look like anyway? And I think the thing that's been very different in these past few years particularly is that things are always kind of changing, but the rate of change has just been huge in the last few years, much faster than the usual rate of change. The pandemic's changed a lot about the way we work, for example, about the way we interact in our communities. And one of the things that I think has been quite hard for a lot of people too around the pandemic has been a real kind of sense of cognitive dissonance that's kind of going on, because in some ways the place that we're at now, it kind of looks like the old normal, but actually it isn't quite the old normal. And we all know that there's kind of this significant disease out there that has deadly consequences for some people, but we're still sort of expected to wander around and kind of get on with our lives. And so it does create this kind of stress really in your brain about what is happening out there and how am I kind of supposed to manage this myself. We've had really different evolution about things like health and how we think about health inside the workplace, whether we come to work when we don't feel well or not. There's a much lower rate of presenteeism, and that comes with its own challenges sometimes. We've particularly found that in our space, we want people to stay home when they're sick, but we also know it's really difficult sometimes to keep things open when people are sick. So there's that kind of stress as well. People are much more cautious about their health. And then we're also seeing lots of major global disruptions. So, supply chains, inflation, politically, environmentally, socially, there's these huge kind of changes going on. So with all of the change that's happening, how do we go about thinking about that change? And there are lots of frameworks out there that you can kind of use. And I use this one because it's relatively kind of understandable for helping us sort of think about change. And some of you will be familiar with this. It's the VUCA framework. And VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And so we have volatility is about the kind of the dynamic rate of change. So things are happening fast and they're happening rapidly. We have uncertain change, and that's often when you've got a real lack of predictability or information. Sometimes people kind of talk about trying to sort of operate in a bit of a fog. You can have complexity in the environment, and complexity is often about kind of interdependent systems where it's not always clear what's kind of causing, what the cause and effect of different interventions might be. And I often think that often some of the really wicked problems that we face are often really complex, because depending on what you try and where you try and intervene, sometimes it has unexpected consequences in other parts of the system. And climate change is a really interesting example of that kind of complexity, where you're not quite fully sure if you pull one lever what the effect of that might be. And then we've got the ambiguity, which is really about kind of a challenge of understanding and kind of assessing reality and what's happening. So it's just kind of a very, ambiguous, uncertain, but trying to assess what the reality kind of is. And And so this is just kind of one way of thinking about the changes, because when we're thinking about what change and what's happening, it can be really useful to try and identify what kind of change we're dealing with, because in each of these cases, the way you might deal with them is a little bit different. And so, for example, some of the things that we have going on at the moment in the world, so we've got things like global politics, which is really volatile, and it can quickly impact on us. And although we kind of think of global politics as something that, maybe is a little bit far removed, I was talking to a colleague a couple of weeks ago who was really involved in the Australian Writers' Festival, and they had a speaker who kind of came out as being quite pro-Israel, and that just completely kind of tipped their entire, program and how they manage that, all the health and safety around it, how they manage all the media, just kind of turned it completely upside down. So even when you think sometimes these kind of global things are not having an impact, often they really are. Ambiguity, we're kind of seeing that a lot of that at the moment with government funding cuts. If you're in central government, what's that meaning for my job? If consultants are cut, what does that mean if you're in you're working for a consulting services business? In local government, if everyone's struggling to get money into water infrastructure, as we certainly are, what does that mean for the budget for the rest of your services? So it's just a way of thinking about, the different kinds of change and how we might respond to those. And so the question then kind of becomes, well, how do we respond? And so I have a few kind of starters for 10 about what we might do and how we might think about some of these things. And I hope that we'll have a bit of discussion kind of after we've gone through some of these, because I think one of the things that is really interesting about this topic is that there's so many different ways to respond to change, and there's a lot of individual kind of nuance to that, because in different circumstances, different techniques and different opportunities will be the right things to do. So I've really kind of split this up, I guess, into 3 sort of sections. How do we respond and how do we kind of manage ourselves? How do we respond to kind of help our teams? And then how do we respond in a way that can help our customers? And so when thinking about how we respond and thinking about ourselves, one of the ways of dealing with really kind of complex and uncertain situations and environments is to help to try and manage some of that ambiguity for yourself by actually finding out a little bit more about what's going on. And so, sometimes we do this by thinking about things like leaning into some future thinking. So, what's around the corner for my library, or what's around the corner for my library sector, and actually thinking about what that might look like. So, for example, you might kind of think, if you think kind of at the library level, in special libraries, a significant issue that you might kind of want to learn more about and get more certainty about might be around ChatGPT and large language models, for example. And, maybe if you're working in a special library and you've got lots of people who are, very used to doing their own research and thinking, I will just use ChatGPT and I will find all the answers, and then finding that it's kind of regurgitated something from the internet with a fake reference, kind of thinking about how can I manage that? How can I understand more about this? And how can I kind of shepherd, the people that I work with through that? How do I deal, particularly we see this in public libraries, how do we understand and look at things like polarization of opinions based on things that aren't true, as an example? And so actually learning more about some of the things that are creating that uncertain environment or creating that ambiguous environment can be incredibly useful for us. The second thing that I've often found really useful is just about managing yourself, which is people often kind of talk about that. It's very cliched about kind of, putting on your own, your own gas mask first, as it were, when you're in the planes. And part of why the managing yourself piece is important is because if you can't help yourself and kind of what you're doing. It's really hard to look after others, but also because you can be a good model for kind of different coping mechanisms and things like that for your friends and colleagues. And one of the things that I've found kind of really effective in this, particularly in terms of managing change, managing that stress, is really thinking about what are the things that kind of give me pleasure and give me joy outside of work, and making some time for those things, which I know that sounds really a little bit cheesy, but does work. And one thing that's quite fun to do, actually, if any of you feel like doing this, is actually writing I have a list of about 200 things that I enjoy doing or seeing or participating in. And I often kind of go back to that list and think, actually, it will be a really good pick-me-up if I could just literally spend 10 minutes out in the backyard watching the birds. And sometimes that's just kind of what you need to do. And so thinking about and really proactively managing your self-care, really, during that period of change. I will say too about this, because I think there's this idea as well, when there's lots of change and lots of stress, that the workplace often puts a lot of responsibility back onto the individual to manage all the stress themselves, which I don't think is an appropriate response, actually, from organisations. They also have a concurrent responsibility to help and shepherd people through really difficult times of change. The other thing I would say about this is that, particularly in managing yourself and what's going on, you won't be perfect at this all of the time. Sometimes things will just get too overwhelming, and it's really hard to kind of get out of that too. So I think it's important to be, realistic that when things are difficult and they are stressful, that we recognise what we can do and what we can't do, and also recognise that the organisations have some responsibility in there too. The third thing that I think is really important about just kind of managing ourselves is keeping some perspective on what's going on. And you'll probably all have had that experience sometimes where, suddenly a friend or a loved one kind of gets really unwell, and you think, gosh, the things that I'm dealing with are kind of so small compared to that. And while we don't want to think about that sort of thing all of the time, it can be quite useful to think about, what's my circle of control? What are the things that I can control? What are the things I can influence? And kind of what are the things that actually are really outside of my control? And I often find I have quite a lot of things that I feel as though they're in my circle of influence, but also recognizing that you can't do all of those things, and thinking, okay, if there's perhaps 2 things I really want to influence, what are those things? And putting some effort into those things and really leaving those other things off the table. I think one of the things that's given me quite a lot of perspective over the last few years, particularly here in Wellington and also with Wellington City Libraries, we used to have this saying, in central government about, you don't want anything to go wrong because it will end up on the front page of the Dom Post. And what I've realised over time is that there are worse things than being on the front page of the Dom Post. I've been there lots of times, including photos of actually me, and there are worse things than that. And so I think sometimes it's just helpful for us to kind of continue to gain a little bit of perspective about what's going on. And then in terms of thinking about our teams and how we manage those, the teams and the people that we might be working with through some of these situations, I think there's kind of really 3 things for me. One is just trying to be as transparent as possible about what's going on. And that is really about having good communicating even when we don't know what's going on, being absolutely as upfront as we can about what we know and what we don't know. There will be times sometimes where we can't tell people things, and my view has always been, let's tell them that we can't tell them. And I think that's kind of a more honest way to go, rather than just denying all knowledge, which I think later on often looks like it kind of undermines your integrity. So being transparent, communicating often and frequently, in person wherever possible, which I know is also quite difficult sometimes when we're working with really dispersed teams. The second thing is actually kind of about creating meaning and a little bit about kind of creating moments as well. Creating meaning really kind of in a work sense about making sure that people, even in a situation that might be complex or ambiguous, that people still have some really good and meaningful goals to work towards in their jobs, so that even if some of what they are doing is uncertain, they still have some, actually really good and tangible and meaningful things to work towards, that they can anchor some of what they do on. The other thing that has worked really well for us also has been kind of about creating moments of just fun and joy actually in the workplace. We don't often talk about joy in the context of the workplace, but I think it's quite, it can actually be really quite important. And sometimes it's just about little things that break that relationship between the stressful thing that's going on and work, and just kind of breaking that moment a little bit. And, some of the things that we've done, we've kind of done summer ice creams where we just kind of bought everyone ice creams, and at afternoon tea time we all just went together and had ice cream. When we closed the Central Library, one of the things we did was we had I'm trying to think what it was. I'm pretty sure we had rabbits and maybe a dog, I can't remember, that came in, and we actually, everyone sat around and they patted the rabbits, and actually that was incredibly lovely and a fun thing to do. Midwinter Christmases, not paid for by any part of council, but actually just potluck kind of things. So kind of being able to create meaningful moments that aren't necessarily even related to work, but actually just about continuing to build those relationships with individuals inside your teams. And then the last thing I wanted to talk was about how we respond with customers, particularly when they're under stress. One of the things that I think is often quite difficult, particularly for us, and when we're sort of in service professions and we're dealing with a lot of people in the front line, we often have a huge amount of empathy for people and what people are going through, whether they're kind of colleagues or it's the public and within a public context, or internal customers inside, a special library, or students if you're in an academic library. And I think sometimes this might be a bit controversial. I think sometimes we can slightly overstep a little bit too far into empathy without creating some really solid boundaries for ourselves as well and for our customers. And this is really important particularly where you have people who are displaying behaviours that, particularly over time, are having a really detrimental effect on staff. We've certainly been dealing with some of that, where we have lots of people who, just low level but bad behaviour over time. And I think it's really important that we actually set some boundaries around some of that stuff. And often we have a lot of empathy for people in the situations that are driving that behaviour. But we also have to recognise that for both their benefit and our benefit, sometimes setting those boundaries is really important. The other thing I would say about customers, when give them the team treatment, by which I mean actually some of the things that they need are kind of the same things that the team needs as well. So they do need good communication, and they do need honesty about what's going on. And wherever we can provide that, it's really beneficial for them and can give them a little bit more of a sense of agency as well. This time, about 6 months ago, or actually now, we closed our Matapihi library, which was sort of our temporary pop-up library that we had inside the National Library. And one of the things that worked really well there, because we knew it would be, really hard on the customers and possibly a little bit controversial, because you can never close a library once you open it. That's sort of how things work in councils often. And one of the things that they did there, which was really successful, I think, was that they knew that there were certain customers who had just a huge sense of ownership over that particular space. And sometimes they were former public servants, and they would come there every day and they had their space. And actually, when we closed that, one of our approaches with them was they actually went and had quite personal conversations about the closure of the library and about what options they had, rather than just kind of a blanket email or, you know, a leaflet that's kind of handed out to everyone, but recognizing that kind of sense of ownership around that. And so being able to give them, you know, a little bit of the personal touch, as you probably would for your staff in that same situation as well, but also to help them feel important and recognising their sense of ownership over that space too. The last thing I would just say about customers too is that sometimes you can engage them in a little bit of behaviour change as well. It doesn't always work, so I won't claim this. But there are things you can do to kind of help them in the same way that you might do for your team. And often we do think about things like, you know, how do we do, you know, almost kind of mindfulness activities. And I'm not sure if our corporate librarian, Veronica from WCC, might be here, but she's very good at this in terms of finding ways for people to kind of come together and Lego and puzzles and all kinds of things to actually kind of help people help themselves. And they're often kind of very fun activities, but they also have that kind of mindfulness aspect about them as well, to kind of help them regulate what's going on with themselves as well. We do lots of kind of Lego activities and things like that here. And that's incredibly useful. And there's also, of course, you know, particularly if you're in, you know, other corporate libraries or, you know, a setting where, you know, your customers are kind of internal, there's lots of other things you can do around, you know, displays of relevant books. There are amazing kind of mindful sticker posters you can do where you can kind of make the picture through a series of lots of tiny little stickers. We've often done that with staff here. Ordering resources from the Mental Health Awareness Week website and popping them into books, setting up talks, you know, crowdsourcing ideas on whiteboards. One place I used to work, we had a cartoon board. And after you came off your desk shift, you could stand in front of the cartoon board and just kind of forget what had happened by reading cartoons. So there's lots of kind of little things that you can do to also kind of get them engaged in some of that behaviour change as well. And so that's the end of my slightly longer than I anticipated presentation. So I will hand back to Jo to see if we have some questions and discussion.
Right, it would help if I put my sound on. Thank you, Laurinda. That's really, really, really interesting. And yeah, I was just going to say, has anyone got any questions for Laurinda or comments in general or anything they want to share about, you know, things that they find work or things that they're struggling with? Yeah, I'll just open up to the floor. But just for those of you that might have joined slightly late, don't panic. It's being recorded so that you can watch the whole thing in all its glory at a later date when it gets posted on the LIANZA site. So yeah, has anyone got any questions for us? Everyone's so tired and stressed. But I just find it that really interesting around finding coping time for yourself and doing things to just, you know, take a break from it all. But I did see down at our local cafe a little whiteboard message outside, and I've totally related to it. It said I'm stuck somewhere between I must do more and why bother. And it seems to sum up really well, I think, how a lot of people are kind of feeling at the moment. But yeah, but other than that, and just dealing with the accelerated pace of change. I think we're all used to change. There's always change, but it's just there's so much of it, and it means more complex, and people are just not as resilient. Yeah, it is a bit of a cluster really of stuff to manage.
You know, one of the things I think is interesting about that too is actually just giving up permission to feel two totally different things at the same time, because it is the case sometimes that we just, you know, even in the last week I've kind of come in some days and I was like, there's lots of really interesting things happening at the moment, but I'm also exhausted, and those two things can exist, you know, in the same person at the same time, and that's okay. I've been listening to lots of Brené Brown recently, which you probably, many of you will be familiar with. But, you know, one of the things that she talks about is feelings are for feeling. And actually there's not really much point in kind of pushing some of those things down and, you know, and not thinking about them. Actually, we have to kind of acknowledge them and just think about how we manage them. The idea is not to push the feelings away. It's actually kind of about to manage what's going on, and thinking about how we can, you know, really proactively do that, and just acknowledging all of the things that are kind of bubbling up for us at any one time.
Yeah, I was impressed that suggestion that you have 200 things on your
It's actually, it's a really great exercise. I mean, I know, and I think the key for that one too is to be really specific. So not just, oh, I like spending time with friends, but actually what's the really specific thing that you enjoy about spending time with friends? You know, like I really enjoy it when we go in the morning and we go to the cafe and we have that special coffee, you know, that cafe does, and we talk about world politics, or, you know, kind of being really specific about some of that stuff. And it's everything from activities to smells to food to, you know, just things that I kind of enjoy doing. Like, you know, one of the things I really enjoy doing, which is I have 2 kids, they're 6 and 9, and the 6-year-old loves to be tickled. And you can't think about anything stressful when you're tickling a 6-year-old. Like, you know, it's pure joy. And so that's kind of on my list.
Angela.
Oh, I just like to congratulate you, Laurinda, on being a manager who models such positive, you know, relationships with your team, and acknowledging that, you know, we do have to feel these things and there is a lot going on, and bringing in the joy to every day, because, you know, sometimes it's just what you got to do to get by.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you. I think this has been a great
you.
presentation.
Thank you. And I know I've got a few of my staff in here, so I'm sure they will have a chat to me afterwards if I'm not doing this properly. But I think, you know, I do think that, yeah, we do have to, and I think we try to very much here have empathy for ourselves as well and kind of what's going on. And I think also, you know, part of that is acknowledging that some days you won't be 100%. I'm not 100% every day. And on the days I go 100%, I go 100%. But other days, all you have to give is 20%. And if you give 20%, you've given 100% of what you have, I think is, you know, what we kind of think about. Yeah.
And sometimes we have to actively slow the other people that are trying to pull us all along at their pace.
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing I will just mention too, and this is something that I've kind of encouraged all our people leaders to do this year too, is to think about putting a bit of a wellness plan in place for themselves as well. So we have just a hugely busy year planned, with actually far more projects that I would personally ever want us to be taking on in a year. And so part of us thinking about how we can manage that and stay personally well for that is to say, actually, let's everyone really think actively about how can we keep ourselves well during that time, and just encouraging them to put something in place. I think part of that is, you know, both kind of day-to-day strategies, but also having things to look forward to, both inside and outside of work.
Right, has anyone else got any comments or would like to say something? I've got a nice message from Jane Book. I think laughter is hugely important, though sometimes it borders on hysterical, but even just being able to debrief with colleagues and laugh and share. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
absolutely.
You've got to have a couple of good belly laughs every day, you know, otherwise, yeah, you've got to keep yourself on top of things. Yeah. Anyone else feel free to jump?
No, please. It's Anna here. Hang on. Sorry, Anna here. Yes, just wanted to say thank you very much for that. It's just so easy for any one of us to feel we're sort of, you know, uniquely struggling with whatever, and it's just so like reassuring and affirming to know that it's not just an individual thing.
Yeah. No,
So,
not at all. I think a lot of us kind of feel that sometimes, that, you know, you're the only one. Everyone else seems to be coping. Why am I not coping?
exactly.
And then as soon as you kind of poke a little bit, you realize, no, actually everyone is kind of feeling the same way.
So it's so powerful to just be reminded of that. So thank you.
Kathy.
I just had a question, Laurinda, around your cartoon board, just because it fascinated me when you brought it up. Can you just tell me what that is? Is it people drawing on a board, or is it actual cartoons from the paper? Or
Well, yeah, I used to use cartoons from the paper partly from the paper, and quite often, and sometimes I would request them. I would get calendars for Christmas of, Far Side and things like that. And I would vet them, of course, because not every bit of humour is appropriate for every member of staff or public. But I would actually just kind of post them up on a pin board. And sometimes I would kind of pull things from the internet that had kind of a library theme. And that kind of encouraged us to, take ourselves a bit lightly sometimes about some of the things that were going on as well. I mean, there's tons of quite funny cartoons out there about kind of library services and books and all of that kind of stuff that has a job kind of component to it, but also can make you laugh a little bit about the job or the situations that you find yourselves in sometimes. Dilbert cartoons back in the day used to be sometimes quite good for that, because you're like, oh, I recognise that thing. And it can also, I think too, because you recognise it, can help you feel seen through that as well. And that's super helpful. Yeah.
So that was just for the staff area?
Yeah, we used to have we had kind of a circulation area, and just as you came off the desk inside the door, it was like attached to a column, and so people could kind of close the door behind them, take 2 steps and just stand in front of like the cartoon board for a period of time until they kind of like composed enough to kind of go back into the workroom and continue on with their day.
Thank you, that sounds cool.
Is someone else wanting to say something, or is it just I can hear talking, but I'm not sure if it's someone wanting to say something. I was just, while we're here, I was just wondering with the rest of the SLIS committee members who are actually out there, if you want to turn your cameras on so people can see your beautiful faces. There's Lisa. And while we've got everyone on the line as a captive audience, I'd just like to say, if anyone's interested in joining the SLIS committee, we'd always love to have new members. Or if you've got some questions that you'd like to pose to us offline, there's Jennifer, who's the co-convener, along with, please get in touch with one of us. We'd love to hear from you. And any ideas or thoughts coming out of this conversation today, or just going forward, of what you want us to cover in sessions, or the topics that really matter to you, just feed them through, because we want to do things that people want to knowing about. So just feedback. Is Lisa or Jen, you got any comments or anything you want to add to that?
Definitely. I think that we will be trying to cover off some stuff around AI later this year, and because I know that there is a lot of interest in it, and we do have plans to maybe host a couple of just little social events at some point. So we'd love to see as many of you there as you can, because we really like to see our colleagues. So we actually, after today, we are planning to have just a brown bag lunch, and I think we will have a guest speaker. So we're going to ask Ivy Go from Vic Uni to come and talk to us about statistics and forecast modelling, which will help us as we develop our collections.
Yeah, and we'll do a mix of an in-person, but also some online ones, so it doesn't matter where people are. Just
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So any thoughts or feedback or questions, please send those through. We'd love to hear, to get some ideas from people about what they want, or if they've got a suggestion of a really great speaker or something like that, that would be brilliant. But are there any more questions or thoughts or comments anyone wants to make?
Kathy, you've got your hand up.
Oh, I jumped in. It was fine.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Laurinda. That was awesome. I don't think sometimes, because change is happening so fast to all of us, we really give ourselves that sort of moment to stop and take stock and just think about the next steps. And it's good to know that, you know, even though everything's going really fast, it's okay for us to go quite slowly. It's not going to change.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to talk to you all. And, you know, I'm always actually always available for questions. So I always kind of say, if you do want to ask me about something I've talked about today, you're very welcome to message me. laurinda.thomas@wcc.govt.nz. Always happy to kind of talk and share ideas. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
That's
Right.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laurinda. See ya.
Yes, thank you.